Have you ever stopped to think that what you eat might be affecting your life in ways you can't even imagine? It might sound crazy, but believe me, not every meal is just about sustaining your body. Sometimes, what we put on our plate carries much deeper intentions that can impact our health, our destiny, and even our relationships. Today, I'm going to share something with you that, if you don't have spiritual discernment, might go unnoticed, but it's more real than you think. My name is Adama Ifeoma. I am 59 years old and was born in Ibadan, a vibrant and spiritually rich city in the center of Nigeria. Since childhood, I have been involved in the traditional spiritual practices of my culture, particularly the rituals that connect the living to ancestors and the spirits of the forces of nature. For many years, I lived within this world, practicing rituals that involved consecrated foods, without truly understanding the impact these acts had on the lives of those around me. Today, after being freed by God's grace, I share this story with you. What I'm about to tell you isn't something I heard from others. These are experiences I lived myself. Many people don't believe it until they see it or feel it themselves. But I'll show you how what you eat can have a spiritual power far beyond the simple act of nourishing the body. During the time I lived involved with spiritual practices, I learned a truth that few believe until they experience it up close. Food is not just physical nourishment. It can be a direct channel between the visible world and invisible forces that operate spiritually. Food can be consecrated, spiritually manipulated, and when this happens, it has the power to alter destinies, cause illnesses, weaken relationships, and even enslave a person's soul. I myself participated in rituals where foods were prepared with spiritual invocations, not to nourish, but to bind, divide, or even destroy. Simple ingredients like rice, fruits, and even bread were transformed into instruments of control. These foods weren't just for satisfying hunger. They carried intentions that could seal spiritual pacts without anyone knowing. And the scariest part, many times these foods were offered in such an innocent way. A plate of rice at a family gathering, a dessert at work, even a simple fruit someone offers you with a smile. It's not just food, it's a portal. What you may not know is that not all the food we eat is simply food. When you accept something from someone else, or even from a friend, you're often receiving more than you think. In the past, I myself prepared meals loaded with hidden spiritual intentions. I was instructed to consecrate fruits and other foods with specific words that invoked spirits. These invoked energies could cause a range of problems in the life of those who consumed them. Now I want to know from you, what has been the most important decision you've ever made, and how did it impact your life? Answer in the comments, and also tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with more content like this. I remember preparing apples, bananas, and grapes with spells that sought to attract someone's attention or even manipulate their emotions. The apple, for example, wasn't just a fruit. It became a tool of spiritual seduction, something capable of opening the heart and leaving the person vulnerable. The banana, with its sweet and smooth taste, was used to generate wild sensuality, connecting the person to negative spiritual desires and needs. And the grapes, which seemed so innocent, were used to form deep emotional bonds, often with manipulative people. These fruits weren't placed on altars or temples. They were offered disguised at parties or gatherings, in baskets or food tables, and the victim would never know there was a spiritual risk hidden in them. Behind the seemingly kind act, there was a dark spiritual intention. You might be thinking, how can something as simple as a fruit or a plate of food have so much power? Well, I know it seems irrelevant, but the truth is that common foods can carry enormous spiritual weight. For years, I was taught to prepare dishes with deep spiritual intentions, like the famous amala dish with egusi and gbegiri, so common in Nigerian traditional ceremonies. These dishes, seemingly simple, were prepared with the purpose of invoking oryxars or other spiritual entities. These dishes weren't just a celebration of our culture, they were an open door to spiritual forces that demanded payment. Each ingredient was manipulated not just to add flavor, but to establish a direct connection to the spiritual realm. It wasn't just food, it was an offering, a spiritual bond, an invisible pact. I myself saw people eat these dishes without knowing that they were in fact binding themselves to spirits that later started interfering negatively in their lives. When you eat something consecrated, whether during a religious festival or even at a social event, you are opening an invisible portal that can affect your mental, emotional, and even spiritual health. If you don't have discernment, you might end up accepting food that carries a spiritual weight that over time starts to manifest in various ways, as inexplicable illnesses, spiritual fatigue, arguments at home, and even financial blockages. What is even more frightening is that these foods often don't seem suspicious. They are served with a smile, presented as a good deed, a gesture of kindness. I myself prepared simple foods, like cakes or teas, with spells designed to manipulate emotions or even cause spiritual exhaustion. The truth is, not all food that comes to you has good intentions behind it. Foods like honey, pepper, and eggs, so common in our homes, can be used in spiritually manipulative ways. Honey, with its sweet and smooth taste, can be consecrated for emotional seduction, creating bonds that make a person vulnerable to spiritual manipulation. Pepper, with its intense heat, can be used to generate conflicts and irritation, sparking arguments and misunderstandings within homes or friendships. The egg, a symbol of life and renewal, when manipulated in rituals, can be used to break spiritual cycles, destroy relationships, and create confusion. I've seen with my own eyes how these simple ingredients, when consecrated, can become vehicles of curses and manipulation. And the worst part, most people don't even realize what's happening until the pain, loss, or conflict arrives without explanation. The big issue is that many times the most subtle attacks come from people close to us. Someone you know who may have good intentions, but who, without realizing, may be offering something that carries a negative spiritual energy. Someone offers you a piece of cake during a tough time, or a plate of food made with care. However, what you don't know is that behind this seemingly simple and friendly gesture, there may be a spiritual intention that you can't see. I've witnessed many times the effect of spiritually charged foods that, disguised as acts of kindness, caused serious harm. A friend brought me a simple homemade cake. The gesture seemed genuine, full of affection. But what I didn't know was that she was dealing with feelings of envy toward my life, and unknowingly, that cake carried that negative energy. After eating it, I began to feel a spiritual weight, an increasing anxiety that I couldn't explain. My mind was clouded, and my relationships started changing for no apparent reason. It was as if something invisible had been activated within me. I didn't realize it at the time, but today I know it was that food, loaded with spiritual intentions of envy, that caused a disconnect from the peace I had felt before. And many people who have gone through similar experiences don't realize the true cause of their distress. I know this might seem distant, but the fact is, in many cultures, especially in Africa, food is not just for sustaining the body. It has a deep spiritual purpose. When I participated in traditional ceremonies, I learned that certain dishes weren't just prepared to feed us, they were prepared to feed the spirits, with the intention of pleasing spiritual entities, sealing pacts, and bringing blessings or curses. Typical dishes like amala, iyan, boiled yam, or egusi with bagiri, melon soup with beans, were not just served as food at a cultural event. Often, these dishes were consecrated to oryxars and other spiritual entities. The simple act of eating these foods could unknowingly form a spiritual alliance with an entity that the person hadn't chosen. I myself prepared these dishes with intentions that, at the time, I didn't fully understand. And what I saw was that after consuming foods consecrated in this way, people began to experience changes in their lives. Unexplained depression, financial blockages, arguments at home, mysterious illnesses, and a growing distance from faith. These rituals weren't just celebratory, but were a means of ensuring the loyalty of the participants to the spirits invoked during the preparation and consumption of the foods. What seemed like an ordinary meal was, in fact, an instrument of spiritual connection, and this had serious consequences for all involved. Now you might be asking yourself, but how can something as simple as a piece of cake or a homemade meal have this kind of power? The issue is that, to spiritual eyes, what looks like just simple food can carry with it an energy filled with hidden intentions. Common ingredients like honey, pepper, or even eggs have profound meanings in spiritual practices, and when consecrated, they can become powerful weapons. For example, honey, which we normally associate with the sweet taste of nature, can be used in rituals of spiritual, emotional, and even psychological seduction. It has the ability to sweeten not just the body, but the soul of the person, creating spiritual bonds that can bind a person to desires and behaviors that would not be natural. When consecrated, honey can bring control over feelings and even manipulate emotions, making a person vulnerable. Pepper, with its intense heat, serves an entirely different purpose. Used in certain rituals, it is consecrated to generate discord, fights, and turmoil in relationships. Pepper doesn't just add flavor, it can be used to fuel anger, create animosity, and increase tension, making everything around it feel emotionally explosive. Eggs, in turn, are powerful symbols in many cultures. They represent life cycles, renewal, but when consecrated, they can be used to break these cycles negatively. I've seen with my own eyes how a simple egg used in a ritual can weaken relationships and create mental confusion, creating a sense of disorientation that leads the person to lose their way. And the most frightening part is that many of these foods are offered to us without us having any idea of the spiritual power they carry. It's easy to think that we are safe from something as hidden as spiritual manipulation in food, but the truth is, the enemy often works in subtle ways. He uses seemingly harmless gestures to connect us to a spiritual reality we can't see. Someone offers you a plate of food with good intentions, and you accept it without questioning. The problem is that by accepting that plate, you may be giving permission for spiritual forces you didn't choose to enter your life. I remember once when a close friend brought me a plate of rice she had prepared with so much care. The gesture seemed innocent, and I thanked her with a smile. But what I didn't know was that she was involved in controlled spiritual practices, and that rice was charged with negative energies. After eating it, I felt a spiritual weight so strong I could hardly pray. It was as if a fog had fallen over my mind, making it difficult to focus on God. When you accept food from others, especially from those who, for some reason, have negative feelings like envy or anger, you're allowing those emotions to be transferred to you without even realizing it. Foods prepared with bad intentions can create chaos in the life of the person who consumes them. Family conflicts, unexplained illnesses, emotional frustrations, and spiritual blockages. And the worst of all, most of the time, the person offering the food has no idea what they're doing. They may just be acting according to what they've learned or believe is normal, but the effect on the other person is real. Many times, we accept food in good faith without questioning the intentions of the one offering it. This can happen at family gatherings, among friends, or even at work, where we are presented with a simple meal. However, without spiritual discernment, we cannot see the true intentions behind that meal. I remember an event where everyone gathered for a celebration, and I was offered a piece of homemade cake, a common kindness. Apparently, it was just a moment of socializing, a friendly tradition. But after eating that cake, I noticed a change in my spiritual energy. I began to feel mental pressure, as if something was draining me spiritually. I didn't understand what was happening until I started praying and asking for discernment. That's when I realized that the cake had been prepared with feelings of envy and frustration by the person who made it, and unknowingly I had allowed it to enter my life. The lesson here is clear. Not every food is just food. When you accept something from another person, especially in a context where there are hurts or negative emotions involved, you may be accepting something that goes beyond what can be seen. Food can become a spiritual contact point, opening doors to influences that aren't good. I'm not saying you should start distrusting everything, but rather learn to use discernment. If something inside you, in the spirit, feels uncomfortable accepting a certain food, it's important to pray, ask for guidance, and even bless the food before consuming it. This may be the key to preventing what is offered from carrying something negative. In many cultures, especially African traditions, spiritual parties and celebrations involve preparing special dishes loaded with symbolic and spiritual meaning. And while the parties are moments of joy and unity, we must be alert, because many times the food served during these occasions is not just to satisfy physical hunger. It can be consecrated, made to open spiritual doors that affect the lives of all who consume it. During the years I participated in these celebrations, I saw firsthand how dishes like amala with egusi and pounded yam with efo riro were prepared with specific spiritual intentions. These dishes were not just a symbol of our cultural heritage, but also a way to make a spiritual payment, a transaction with the gods or spirits that required offerings in exchange for favors or blessings. The food, seemingly simple, was actually a vehicle to seal spiritual pacts that many times people didn't notice. I myself prepared and served food in ceremonies that sought to please the Oryxars and other spiritual entities. And what happened after consuming those foods? People started experiencing inexplicable effects, mysterious illnesses, blockages in their lives, emotional and spiritual disturbances, and even a growing distance from their faith. The consecrated food in spiritual ceremonies had the power to transform what would have been a cultural celebration into a moment of spiritual bondage. These foods, prepared with prayers and invocations, can create a deep connection with spiritual entities that influence the lives of those who consume them without them knowing or consciously consenting. This is an aspect of spirituality that is often ignored or underestimated. When you consume food that has been consecrated or prepared with a spiritual intention, you are, in a way, opening a door to whatever that food carries within it. It can be so subtle that most of the time you don't even notice. But the truth is, these foods become spiritual contact points, linking you to entities that can directly affect your life. I, as someone who was immersed in this world for a long time, saw how even the smallest details in a dish could have a huge spiritual influence. For example, when preparing a meal, we would use specific words and incantations, often without others knowing, and this energy would be imprinted on the food. When someone consumed this food, they weren't just satisfying their physical hunger, but they were accepting what was spiritually attached to it. There are many examples I could share, but one deeply marked me. During a ritual, I prepared a dish of rice that, when offered, caused an unexpected change in the life of the one who ate it. After consuming that rice, the person began to experience mental confusion, followed by inexplicable illnesses and a spiritual disconnect that no one could understand. The consecrated food wasn't just a meal. It became a channel for spiritual forces that began to interfere directly in that person's life. That's why, when accepting any meal or even a simple plate of food, discernment is necessary. We cannot allow ourselves to be vulnerable to these spiritual influences without realizing what we are really allowing into our lives. When we talk about spiritually manipulated foods, we often forget an important detail: the emotions of the people who prepare these foods. The emotional energy someone puts into a plate of food can have a deep impact, far more than we realize. When someone offers you something, whether out of love, envy, or anger, those emotions are transferred to the food. And what is offered emotionally charged has the power to affect the one who consumes it. For example, in rituals we performed, it was common for meals to be prepared with a lot of emotion involved, sometimes with feelings of vengeance, sadness, or even frustration. These negative feelings, even if unconscious, would become imprinted in the food and passed on to the person who consumed it. The most dangerous part is that the person eating has no idea what's happening. They feel temporary relief after eating, but over time they begin to experience changes, unexpected conflicts, anxiety, spiritual disturbances, and even physical illnesses. I've seen this happen with people around me. At many ceremonies, the dish of food was seen as an offering to the spirits, but what no one knew was that the emotions of the person preparing the food were embedded in it. When someone who was angry or resentful prepared the meal, that feeling transferred to the one consuming it, deeply affecting their spiritual and emotional life. The food was no longer just food, it became a vehicle for those negative feelings. That's why we need to be vigilant, even with regard to who offers us food. When someone, even with good intentions, offers us something, we should check our spirit and ask ourselves if there's anything hidden there. The Bible speaks to us about the importance of discerning spirits, and this discernment should extend to the food we accept. Now, more than ever, we need to understand the importance of discerning what we are consuming, not just the physical food, but also the spiritual intentions that can be transferred to us by accepting meals from other people. When the Bible speaks in James 1:5, it reminds us that if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. This verse teaches us that we should seek God's wisdom to discern what is good and what is not. This applies directly to spiritual nourishment. When something is offered to us, we should ask the Holy Spirit for discernment, because not all food is simply what it seems to be. Often, it carries more than physical nutrients. It brings with it spiritual intentions that can influence us in ways we cannot see with our natural eyes. And just as James instructs us, we can ask God for wisdom to guide us so that we are not deceived or vulnerable to spiritual tricks. I learned the hard way that spiritual discernment is crucial. There were times when I accepted food without thinking, but then I realized, in a disconcerting way, how those foods affected my peace and connection with God. Today, I know that whenever I feel any kind of discomfort or unease when accepting food, I should pray and ask God to give me discernment and wisdom to understand whether that food carries something that doesn't come from Him. When you consume food that has been spiritually consecrated, you're not just ingesting something to nourish your body. You are, in fact, connecting to spiritual forces that can alter your destiny. These influences are not limited to immediate events, but have a lasting effect that can manifest in various ways over time. The problem is that many of us don't realize the spiritual connections we're creating because the effects are not always visible right away. I remember a woman who consumed a dish during a celebration in her community. The dish seemed harmless, but it had been consecrated to a spirit of prosperity with the intention of attracting material wealth to the life of whoever ate it. Although it seemed like a blessing, the results began to appear in a subtle way. She lost her peace of mind, started having nightmares, and experienced a sense of disconnection from her faith. After some time, her finances began to decline, and there was no logical explanation for it. This kind of spiritual attack can be very devastating because the effects are not immediate. You may eat something today, and weeks or even months later, you begin to notice that something is wrong. The enemy knows how to work in a patient and stealthy manner. He doesn't need a big battle. What he needs is a discreet entrance. And often, this starts with something as simple as a plate of food. Food can be a vehicle for more than just negative energies. It can also be a bridge to spiritual alliances that, once formed, can be very difficult to break. When a person consumes consecrated food, they are not just nourishing their body, they are accepting whatever that food carries inside it, whether it's a pact with the spirit or a connection with a spiritual power that unknowingly enters that person's life. I've witnessed many situations where a person consumed something that appeared harmless, like a plate of rice, a dessert, or even a juice, and without realizing it, became bound to a spirit. The worst part is that these alliances can be made without the conscious consent of the person, which makes the process even more insidious. The worst of all is that until the person has spiritual discernment, they don't even know they are under this influence. And as time passes, their life is shaped by these spiritual forces. I, personally, was one of those people who, in the past, was involved in food consecration rituals. I saw firsthand how seemingly simple foods were used to form invisible spiritual alliances. These spiritual alliances don't manifest immediately, but over time you begin to notice that something in your life is blocked. Financial doors closed, relationships that wear out without explanation, or a sense of spiritual disconnection that you can't overcome. Now that you've heard all this, take a moment to think. What if that food you recently ate, or that seemingly innocent gesture from someone you know, was more than just a meal? What you are putting in your body and accepting from others could be carrying spiritual influences that you don't see, but that can have a profound impact on your life. Have you been practicing spiritual discernment regarding the food you accept? Have you ever stopped to pray before consuming something, seeking the guidance of the Holy Spirit to know whether that food brings with it something that could affect your spiritual and emotional life? I want to invite you now to a prayer where we will ask God for discernment, protection, and wisdom in everything we do, including our food choices. Close your eyes if possible and repeat after me. Lord, thank you for opening our eyes to the spiritual realities that surround us. We ask for wisdom and discernment so that we can make conscious choices, protecting ourselves from negative influences, whether through food or any other means. May we hear your voice at all times, and may your peace guard our hearts and minds. In Jesus' name, amen. God has the power to restore, renew, and protect you from all the enemy's traps. If this video spoke to you, share this message with someone you love. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because we have new videos every day with more content that will strengthen your spiritual life. I want to hear from you. Have you noticed anything unusual after eating something offered by another person? Or perhaps you've felt changes in your life that you can't explain. Leave a comment below sharing your experience, and let's talk about it.